Hi everyone, it's Jazz, and I actually want to talk about intercultural relations and how we really can make that work. And that doesn't have to be romantic relationships, that can be friendships, that can be colleagues, just basically being able to live in a space where we are interacting with people who are different from us, whether it's a culture or a different language. So let's get started. So the number one thing I would say is, putting up with sometimes stereotypes or questions you may not have really had, because one of the things I remember when I was in Germany was because I was generally the only Black person in the room, and I had braids in my hair and these kinds of braids. So they'd never seen that before. And so they kept asking questions about it. And in America, it's more of like, I think this one Polish lady put her hands in my hair and was like, oh my gosh, this is so cute. And I was like, we don't do that. In America, we just don't touch people's hair like that, especially if you don't know them very well. And then, so I had to explain my hair and how it works and all these cultural aspects that I really wasn't really. The thing about it is that they don't know, and because the area that I was in was not as diverse, so having to explain these things is kind of was kind of a pain in the butt, because especially in my own country, I don't get that very much. So it's like I said, you have to understand the fact that especially if you're in a foreign environment, people may kind of have questions or curiosities about you. I think it's not really a bad thing. I think it's always a good idea to ask questions, but then at the same time, it's like, because I think we get really easily offended in America, whereas in other countries, it's just like, I just straight up want to know, like it's burning inside of me, and we can only learn and grow if we're asking questions. The other thing is discussing what language you want to communicate primarily in. This is a very important aspect, because it really depends, especially when we meet people and it's like, oh, I speak Spanish and you speak Spanish. But then for me, it's like I primarily shy away from speaking Spanish because of my insecurities. But for me, I honestly think you should go for it. But I know in certain circumstances, it can be people can be uncomfortable speaking certain languages. Sometimes native speakers prefer to speak in your language because they want to practice, and also vice versa. So, even I remember like when I was in a relationship with someone from Germany, I primarily wanted to speak in German because that was the language I was learning. And we did a little bit of English in between just to kind of clarify understanding. I dated someone who was from Romania, but the thing is, he's been in America for so long that we primarily spoke in English. I attempted to learn the language, and it's really interesting because it's like a completely different language than all the other Latin-based languages that I know, because it's like further on the eastern part of Europe. But primarily we spoke in English. So it really just depends, especially if you're in a foreign country, let's say you're working abroad or you're visiting your family you may have, or visiting friends, or going on vacation, is that you have to understand, in the environment, what language are we speaking. Also having to explain, sometimes explaining political and economic issues. Even when I was in France, I remember talking about Donald Trump, but I said, I never voted for him, but I just want to know, like, from your perspective as a French person, what do you think about Trump? And first thing he said was, I'm so glad you told me you did not vote for Trump, because this date would end right now. And so, and I remember like in the last election, the 2020 election, I saw on Instagram my friends in France and other countries literally watching our election saying, vote him out. Like, he's like, we don't like him. And so kind of understanding those political aspects is that sometimes they may ask, one thing I don't understand about America is blah, 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 blah. And it creates a really great conversation starter, especially like I said, not getting easily offended, but also like trying to understand the other person and where they're coming from. And I think like this is just in any friendship, any type of, relationship where you want to develop some type of like, any type of like connection with someone. But like I said, this can be romantic, this can be non-romantic, any type of relationship you want to build with someone, even on a professional level, asking questions. and discussing why do you do this way, or why do you do this, why is your country this way? And it kind of makes you understand each other because we're asking questions, which I always say we should always be doing. And other things that you can do is looking at different holidays or different traditions and kind of discussing those too, or even kind of trying to acknowledge it, especially like if someone's coming from, if you have a friend who's from another country and, it's like, oh, I celebrate this in my country. Looking those things up and, also being able to acknowledge it for the other person, because like I said, it's a matter of trying to reach out and connect to that other person. And then last thing I'll say is just trying to communicate to understand each other's culture and language, and just build connection with just anyone. Is that it's really important. It's really important that we get used to it, because if we're used to having these kinds of conversations, is that it makes it easier for us to kind of be more inclusive as a society. Because I feel like with a lot of, this is just my opinion, so no one has to agree with me. But when it comes to things like racism, or even like xenophobia, or, these kinds of, all kinds of different forms of discrimination based on people that are a part of communities that we're not a part of, you have to kind of bridge the gap. The more you understand and try to kind of, at least, especially on a cultural basis, when we look at that and we have conversations and we have these kinds of discussions that I've put on the table for you, is that, we kind of bridge those gaps. Like, oh, I didn't realize that, I was thinking about this one other day at work when I got Thai food, and I remember eating it with chopsticks. And I realized is that, like, even though, like, it's kind of like and I just had a curious thought, is that, with chopsticks, and then of course in America, we generally use forks and knives and things like that. But, I realized is that maybe like a lot of these things come from the fact that this is what they had, like it's like, oh, we have trees and wood. So let's make chopsticks. And that becomes like a part of that culture, because that's where they have, especially geographical features. There's a lot of stories behind certain things. That's something to also even ask about, or even do your own research for. So everyone loves when they can be able to talk about themselves and their culture, and vice versa. So I hope this helps you when it comes to building intercultural relationships, whether it be with people who are in your own community, or even when you're going out into a foreign territory. So have a good one.